This week on Newsnight, Mayor Demings denies Orange County is hiding information from the state's DOGE team as county employees receive subpoenas from investigators. Plus, what might happen next in the fight over art on Florida's public roadways. Newsnight starts now. Hello, I'm Steve Mort. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, the state's probe of spending at Orange County and other local governments around the state. The DeSantis administration's DOGE team alleges an effort to obstruct its investigators looking into the county's finances, including spending on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. It's issued a sweeping set of state subpoenas to 16 county employees, demanding emails and documents tied to several nonprofit grant programs. State officials alleged missing files and altered records. Florida's Chief Financial Officer, Blaise Ngolia, says his team is probing possible misuse of taxpayer funds and irregularities in county records.
We accumulated about 1.2 million emails of everything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, there were 6 grants that were given out for DEI programs. When we started searching the 1.2 million, 5 of those grants were not alluded to in any of those emails. So I wonder what happened with those emails. So it's telling me that it is probable that we did have county employees try to hide some of this information. Now, I'm probably freaking out a lot of Orange County employees right now. My advice to you is when you are contacted and when you're going to be interviewed, do not hide the information. Be truthful with them. We know that people above you told you to go and change the information in an effort to try to hide the information from us. Don't lie to us. Because if we have to, we will bring in FDLE and digital forensic units to find out exactly who did what.
Meanwhile, Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings insists the county is cooperating fully and that no employees have been instructed to alter, change or delete any documents. In a statement, the mayor says, the state has offered no evidence to support its allegation that we were hiding information or acting without integrity. We welcome the opportunity for full public transparency on this issue. All right, well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. And joining us in the studio this week, Ryan Gillespie, writes about local government for the Orlando Sentinel. Thanks for coming in, Ryan.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. It's been a long time. Gabrielle Rousson now writing for Florida Politics on the regular. You also write a little bit for the Winter Park Voice.
Yep, freelancing and covering Orange County, yes.
Good to see you, Gabrielle. Thanks so much for coming in. And Brendan Byrne, Assistant News Director at Central Florida Public Media. Good to see you, Brendan.
Good to be here.
Thanks so much for coming in, guys. Appreciate it. Brendan, let me start with you. Central Florida Public Media has been across this story. Just outline what the state is asking for in these subpoenas and what's included.
Yeah, simply put, the state wants these computer files related to the county's DEI efforts, climate initiatives, and others. And they specifically outline 6 organizations that these records pertain to. These are organizations that service the Black and LGBTQ plus residents largely. And they also want files of log deletions, because as we saw, the CFO is alleging that the county employees had covered this up, and we saw that Mayor Demings has denied that the county has done any wrongdoing. But that's essentially what they're looking for with these subpoenas.
Yeah, you've reported on this with your colleague, Steve Hudak, who covers a lot of Orange County government, Ryan. I mean, what's the crux of the state's problem with the county's finances? What is Blaise Ngolia talking about?
So what's interesting is their issues aren't actually unique to Orange County, because it's basically the same story for every local government in Florida. Is budgets have ballooned over the last 5 or so years because their budgets are funded by property taxes, and property tax collections are determined by property values. So we've all seen how housing prices spike in the last 5 years, and so even in places like Orange County, which hasn't raised their property tax rate since 2008, their budget's gone up $1.7 billion, and property tax collections are up 40% over 5 years. And their position at the state level is that government shouldn't be increasing their budgets. They should be cutting taxes and cutting budgets, even as population grows.
And of course, the governor has spearheaded this effort to try to get property tax eliminated altogether. You've been covering this story for Florida politics, Gabrielle, including Mayor Deming's reaction. He's sort of subsequently expanded on that statement that I just read there. What have we heard from county leaders, and do we know how they plan to move forward now?
Sure. Well, Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings had some really strong words, and he said what the state is doing. He said it's a politically motivated attack. And, Demings is a Democrat, Orange is blue, Florida is growing more and more red. Demings said, quote, "This community is a target." But Demings also said, he's not going to defy the subpoenas. He's going to give the state what they're asking. Demings is a former police chief and a former county sheriff, and he said, the state's investigation is tainted. They're trying to intimidate witnesses and having a press conference to announce an investigation. They're not going in this, looking at the facts and looking at the evidence to see where it takes them.
It does seem like there's a more adversarial relationship between some of these blue areas of the state and the state as a whole. I mean, they're operating in a different environment now than they used to be.
Sure. And just a couple weeks ago, the state threatened to remove Demings and the county board from office when they were fighting over that ICE contract. So there are definitely high tensions running between Orange County and the state. I
mean, Mayor Demings, as Gabrielle says he suspects that politics are behind this decision to look into Orange County. But, the Republican-run governments in Florida are also being targeted too.
Some of them, yeah. The DOGE effort, they're looking at Manatee County, which is a red county. There's kind of some other politics at play there over some positions local government's taken there in terms of development and sprawl, kind of in some ways similar to what we see in Orange County. But, when Mayor Deming says he thinks politics are at play, I have to imagine some of that is he sees the city of Orlando receiving an audit. They haven't raised taxes or property tax collections in more than a decade. Orange County hasn't since 2008. But he looks at his neighbor to the north, Seminole County, which is a red county, all Republicans on that county commission who voted all of a month ago to raise their property tax rate as well as their gas tax. And then
they go in the opposite direction.
Exactly. They're actively raising taxes. And then there are at least 10 other cities across Central Florida, predominantly in red areas, mind you, in Lake County, in red parts of Orange County and West Orange, and as well as Seminole, that are also looking at raising taxes. And none of those cities have gotten a DOGE letter, whereas Orange County has.
And I think it's worth pointing out, like with Orange County, this is a multi-billion dollar, $9 billion annual budget. And DOGE is looking at 6 grants. So it's
worth
a
few hundred grand.
Yeah, so that's kind of important context of how big these budgets are and what DOGE is kind of targeting and pointing out at these press conferences.
Yeah, the budgets of the counties in Florida, which are large counties, are substantial, as you say. It's also worth noting that Blaise Ngolia just recently announced his candidacy to take on the CFO role full-time. I guess he'll run in 2026. So, clearly, if he succeeds in that, this is the kind of thing that we can expect to see going forward.
And he's really arguing, I'm doing this for the taxpayers. That's why I'm doing this. That's what he would say.
Yeah. Well, be sure to find us on social media as well. We're at WUCF TV on Facebook and Instagram. You'll also find us on X at NewsNight WUCF. We always like to hear from you. Meanwhile, Orange County itself recently completed an audit. It's been looking into the books at Visit Orlando. That's the regional tourism promotion agency, to see how it's using tourist development tax dollars collected by the county. Visit Orlando has a 2019 tourism promotion agreement with Orange County and gets about $100 million of TDT funding a year. In its review focused on 2023, the Comptroller's Office found what it believes to be questionable spending and multiple compliance issues in the handling of public money. At a recent Orange County Commission meeting, board members grilled Visit Orlando about the findings and an estimate from the Comptroller's Office that the agency may have misclassified nearly $20 million in TDT revenue as private money, prompting commissioners to call for a refund.
I absolutely think it's our responsibility to get the taxpayer money back and to comply and get this contract completely compliant and not negotiate a contract that was agreed upon. We should enforce it. And I hope this board will take that courageous effort and do right by the taxpayers of Orange County who came up here, and all the ones that came up here to defend tourism. We will defend it with you, but we will defend it transparently, correctly, and abiding, and get taxpayer money back.
In the report, There was not an area that said misuse, and every dollar it was accounted for in our practice and will continue. I went through pretty much every detail of our response in the audit, and in most cases we've already taken action or we're in the process of taking action.
Well, it's worth noting that the $20 million estimate is a larger number than the number given in the audit, which only covered the 2023 calendar year. Gabrielle, let me come to you first on this. You covered that meeting. Just outline what the audit found in terms of compliance and alleged, questionable spending, I guess, and what commissioners seem most concerned about.
Sure. It's a really long audit, so there were lots of issues raised and allegations raised. One finding from the audit was Visit Orlando inappropriately used $12,000 in public money to pay for its executive's car allowance. There was a party in New York City that cost $75,000, a Michelin event. The audit, another finding was $20,000 spent on 2 Kia skyboxes during March Madness. During the county meeting, some commissioners voiced concerns about Visit Orlando spending $100,000 on a lobbyist and events in Tallahassee during committee week, saying, Visit Orlando shouldn't be spending money to lobby and trying to influence. But, Visit Orlando got an opportunity to defend itself. Like for the Michelin event, Visit Orlando said, that's helped get national media attention on Orlando and promote, we're doing our job. That got a lot of big media to mention Orlando restaurants and our food scene.
Some of the concerns seem to be that, this contract dates back to 2019. This audit was for 2023, so maybe we should be looking at the numbers in the intervening years.
And $20 million, that's a lot of money. Some commissioners raise concerns. We need to get that money back. We could spend that money to help local art organizations or help pay off our debt. $20 million is a lot of money. But, not all commissioners were fired up about the audit. Yeah. Some said, this is an issue that county staff and county attorneys can work with Visit Orlando. We'll sort this out. So there was kind of a range of emotions from the county board meeting on
you
this
guys
audit.
You guys, Central Florida Public Media, have been covering this as well. Do we know what happens next?
They basically pushed back any action. So I think it's till about December.
Okay.
But Mayor Demings really wanted the commission to have time to kind of wrap their heads around this audit. As Gabrielle mentioned, there's a lot in this. It's a lot of money. They wanted to make sure they had appropriate time to go through it, because some of the actions could be, changing the contracts or pulling contracts or even forcing Visit Orlando to pay that money back. So, there's some, pretty large consequences to what could happen. They're waiting and doing their homework before they take any action later this year.
I did want to ask you, Gabrielle, about a little side story. At this hearing, Visit Orlando actually showed footage from a Today Show filming in Winter Park. That's the NBC morning show that sparked intense controversy right back in May when that aired. You wrote a piece for the Winter Park Voice on this. What was the complaint from Winter Park officials there?
Yeah, Beth Cassup from Winter Park Voice has really led this story. When they were when Visit Orlando was defending itself from the audit, they played this clip of the Today Show in town for Epic Universe's grand opening. Al Roker's there, and everyone's talking about how great Orlando is, or there's more to do than just the theme parks. And if you're a local eye, you'll watch the Today Show segment, and you'll recognize the train station and Winter Park, the cute downtown scene and the park, and it's very lovely there. Locals will know where it is. But the millions of people watching the Today Show probably wouldn't know where it is because nobody mentioned that it was in Winter Park.
It was branded as Orlando,
Yeah,
right?
it was rated as Orlando, and that really ticked Winter Park city officials off. And said, I think they gave the park for free to Visit Orlando. They rented it for free, waived the fees. And they said, we don't want to do that again unless we make sure we get our shout out.
But it was interesting that there was a controversy about it, and then they showed it at the
county meeting.
Orange County
and
Commission
no one
meeting.
mentioned, that how this would really annoy this clip really annoyed Winter Park. No one mentioned that at the county.
No. Questions about how Visit Orlando spends its money, though, right, Ryan, are not particularly new. The Sentinel's covered this over several years.
Yes, and really this whole conversation is framed by the whole premise of the tourist development tax, which Gabby mentioned. Basically, the way that tax is spent is limited to tourism marketing and things that promote tourism. So you see it spent a lot on like expansions of the convention center, or it helped build the Dr. Phillips Center or the Kia Center and some other venues like that. But as we've seen housing costs go up, and this region's got it struggles with homelessness and affordable housing, and infrastructure costs and law enforcement costs and all kinds of other things. There's some local officials on that county commission who would love to be able to spend this huge sum of money on at least some of those issues, maybe as well as Visit Orlando. And to do that, you would probably need to look at how much you are spending on Visit Orlando.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about TDT dollars and how they should be used, and whether the amount being spent on Visit Orlando should be cut to fund other local priorities like housing and transportation. That came up during the Board of County Commissioners meeting as well.
For the protection of our industry and for the protection of our local economy, Visit Orlando absolutely has a purpose, and nobody here thinks that it doesn't. The question becomes is it a $115 million purpose? And so when you hear the good things that Visit Orlando does and how it gives back to the community, but you also hear, 25% of the public saying, hey, we need some additional help with our community, and we want to see diversification of that. I think that there's a common ground between industry and the public.
That's Commissioner Kelly Martinez Semrad. Gabrielle, Visit Orlando is definitely used to making a case for itself, right? I mean, it's sort of a valuable tourism promotion tool. And in fact, it says the industry itself continues to go gangbusters in Central Florida, right? What do the most recent numbers say from Visit Orlando?
Well, Visit Orlando recently commissioned an economic impact survey study. And, they said that they had tourism was a record-breaking year in Orlando. $94.5 billion in economic impact in 2024. So we had 75 million people visit Orlando last year, and direct visitor spending grew 5% according to Visit Orlando's study. To put that in perspective, the economic impact is equivalent of hosting the Super Bowl twice a week for a year. That's pretty huge. And then that's indirect and direct benefits to our community from, helping tourism helps the supply chain, construction, financial services, and direct jobs at the parks and restaurants and hotels. 37% of our economy in the region is tied directly to tourism.
It is a huge industry, isn't it?
And so Visit Orlando says, we play a big role in helping grow our tourism. And you got to think, you don't forget, in 2020, tourism was in an economic crisis with the pandemic shutdowns. And Visit Orlando has helped promote and grow to get the tourists coming back. So now we're having record-breaking numbers several years later.
But I wonder whether we know how the public feels about it. Where does the public stand on sort of more diversified TDT use?
Well, Florida Politics had a story come out last month. There was a new survey by Hill Research that found that 79% of Orange County voters support TDT. And this was similar to another poll from July that had similar results from the Florida Center for Political Strategy, that there was support across party lines for TDT. But if you ask people, you ask the average person, do you want to spend $100 million on Visit Orlando, or would you like to be able to ride the Sunrail to go to the airport?
Yeah.
And there's also a push from people wanting some reforms. The Orlando Business Journal had a story recently saying that the Rosen Hotel CEO, Frank Santos, wanted to increase the TDT tax from 6% to 10%. There's enough money to go around, especially if we raise that tax. And I know at least one county commissioner has supported that as well.
And Steve, just to bring everything that we've talked about so far today together, when we go back to the DOGE stuff, a lot of these local budgets are strained because of law enforcement costs.
Yep.
And so if we think about what do 75 million tourists, is that what you said?
75 million, yeah.
Those 75 million people, you gotta have law enforcement to protect them and things like that. And this is money that by law cannot be spent on those type of needs. So that's a lot of the push that we're seeing is these tourists, they do great things for the economy, but they also flush our toilets. They also stay in our hotels. They also use our roads. They require law enforcement. So that's really the push and pull of this whole thing.
Well, it's an interesting topic, and we'll see how it plays out in the coming weeks and months. Well, Gabrielle does a lot of reporting on the tourism industry in Central Florida. She has a story out this week in Florida Politics on the challenges of extreme heat at Disney World and other major theme parks. We've put a link up to that on our website, to that reporting. It's wucf.org/newsnight. Okay, finally tonight, let's stay with local government and its relationship with the state. We wanted to get an update on protests against the decision by the Florida Department of Transportation to paint over the Rainbow Crosswalk at Pulse. Several people have been arrested since the state put up signs warning protesters who'd been using chalk to colour in the crosswalk not to deface the roadway, sidewalk or impede traffic. But when we visited on Wednesday, chalk was still being used to draw on the sidewalk on either side of Esther Street near the memorial. The crosswalk itself remained clear of colour as FHP troopers continued to watch over the site. The governor's addressed the issue several times. At an appearance in Orlando this week, he was asked about the recent arrests.
You don't have a First Amendment right to commandeer someone else's property. You have a First Amendment right to paint your own property and knock yourself out if that's what you want to do. But when you have a state crosswalk or a state road, the law in the state of Florida is now that there's not markings or that's not going to be used for those purposes.
Since the arrests, protesters have taken their grievances and chalk to the sidewalk outside City Hall. FDOT says its new manual requires roadway art of any kind to be removed statewide. All right, well, let's talk about the latest on this story. I'll start with you, Ryan. The city's in the process of removing crosswalks throughout the city, pavers and other artwork as well from roadways. Is it still asking the state for an exception, though, on the Pulse site?
Yeah, it is, and actually we can just definitively say they're actually done covering up the 14 crosswalks.
Okay.
We're filming this on September 4th, and this was the deadline, and they told me this morning that they are done. But yeah, they are still seeking an exception for Pulse. As far as I know, that's just kind of an administrative process. There's not going to be a hearing or anything like that, but Mayor Buddy Dyer sent a letter to FDOT last week making the case that this is something that is a tribute to the victims of the Pulse shooting. It's also been a safety enhancement with some data backing that also was approved by FDOT, and he basically just made the ask, and it's up to FDOT to say yes or no. Certainly publicly, they have postured that they don't think they're going to be making exceptions for anybody, so we'll wait and see.
Well, you've been writing about this too, Gabrielle. I mean, there seems to be some pushback, in fact, on that claim by the governor that the law he signed earlier this year actually requires street art to be removed.
Yeah, and Governor DeSantis has been saying, no one's allowed to commandeer the roads, and he's citing a new state law, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. The bill was a really long bill, but it doesn't actually mention specifically street art.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of provisions in it, and one of them is FDOT can withhold money for road projects if local government doesn't, comply with orders. But it doesn't actually say, no street art allowed on crosswalks. And when there was debate on this bill during the legislature, this issue about the crosswalks wasn't debated or discussed or brought up, and even Democrats voted in favor of the bill.
Yeah.
And even the Republican on the committee, who's the committee chairman, said that none of this was brought up.
Well, as we heard just now, the governor's defended those arrests, right, of Pulse protesters this week. What do we know about those cases specifically?
So there were several people that were arrested over the weekend. They were all released, and it is now in the hands of Orange Osceola State Attorney Monique Worrell if she's going to file charges. She has said that she's going to review these cases with fairness and transparency. Those comments came after DeSantis made the statement that it is in her hands and she's going to make this political. We know the two of them have had a history before, but essentially it's in the hands of the state attorney's office now to see what will happen.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that does tee up a clash. Orlando maintains that these multicolored street art installations actually improved safety. I mean, what evidence do they have of that?
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable to think about because I wrote about this 3 or 4 years ago, and they were telling me this, and I hadn't seen them in person, and I was very skeptical. But there's national studies that certainly point to that. In Tallahassee, they put them in school zones, and they have data that shows drivers drive slower. They yield to pedestrians at higher rates. There's other studies around the country that show that. But specifically in Orlando, the Pulse Rainbow, for instance, that was the first one painted over. It's on a really busy stretch of Orange Avenue. It gets something like 35,000 cars per day. It was installed in 2017. There have been 4 crashes since then. And then the ones downtown are more recent in the last couple of years, but the city has data that they were taking that shows usage of the crosswalks tripled, which is a big deal in pedestrian safety. People actually want to cross at these crosswalks, they see them, they use them, and also conflicts with cars in that time are down 65%. So drivers are also driving slower, better, stopping at crosswalks, yielding to pedestrians. This was such a successful program at a low cost that the city was looking to expand this. There was about 28 others that they were looking at to do in the coming years. And when you talk about improving pedestrian safety, if you touch a road, basically, like, you're into millions and millions of dollars of spending to put in, any kind of improvement. And doing this for tens of thousands of dollars is a much cheaper alternative.
Really interesting data. Well, talking about spending, it seems that the Sentinel's having some trouble getting data on how much this is all costing to remove the street art.
Yeah, so we put in public records requests to FDOT for all kinds of things. For one, we wanted to know who made this decision, why was this decision made, was there any data behind this decision, because I've only seen studies that say this is generally a safety initiative, that this works. We've asked DOT, both Florida Department of Transportation, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the governor's office to supply us with any data or studies that would show the contrary, and they've refused to do so. And then we've got a bunch of records requests that are pending now. We haven't received an acknowledgement, at least as we sit today, and so we're still pursuing those records.
Well, it has been a pattern, as you talk to journalists, that this administration has been quite slow on public records requests. We've put a link to that law that the governor cites on our website to read for yourself, wucf.org/newsnight. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Ryan Gillespie, Gabrielle Rousson, and Brendan Byrne. Thank you so much for coming in, guys. Really appreciate it. Good conversation today. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. From all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.